We begin the Gemara today, 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Gimel Amud Beis, where it says, V'i bo yisema. The Gemara here will bring a second explanation for what it said in a Braisa quoted earlier, that if it's a time of an oinus, something that's out of your control, so then he can marry his wife even on a Monday, b'yom sheni. So the Gemara before explained this refers to an oinus when you have a general that's coming into the city together with all of the soldiers, and they're afraid that they're going to eat the food prepared for the chasana. Now the Gemara brings a second shot. If you want, I can tell you the following answer. My machmas ha'oinus. What does the Braisa mean when it says that an oinus would occur? Kedetanya, as it said in a different Braisa, the following incident. Harei shahoye pitoy afoy, person that had the bread or the challah baked for the chasana, v'tifchoy tavuach, and the animal slaughtered. In other words, the meat prepared for the chasana. V'yeinoi mazig, and the wine poured, as it was in those times. The wine had to be diluted with water, and it's all prepared. Umeis aviv shel chasen or imma shel kala. The father of the chasen or the mother of the kala pass away. So what do you do now? You have here either the option to make a levaya, to bury the dead body, or to first go ahead and do a chasana. So the halach is as follows: Machnisin es hameis lecheder. We first place the dead body into a room, and we delay the levaya. And we allow the chasna and kala to get married first. Because if they're not going to get married right now, so then they can't get married until after the 7 days of Avelos. And then the food that was prepared for the chasana will not be used at all. It'll all go to waste. They'll lose. There'll be a tremendous financial loss, and there'll be nobody to prepare the food for the chasana and kala. Ubayol bi'ilas mitzvah. And then the husband is bayil, the first bi'ilah, which is a mitzvah, and then upayrish, he separates from his wife, and now v'noyeg shivus yimei mishta. Some Rishonim actually are going to say in the Gemara that after this, after the night of the chasana, so then v'achakach koiveres meisai. That's when they bury the father or the mother, and then v'noyeg shivus yimei mishta, because the chasana was first. So therefore, they continue with the 7 days of Shivas Yimei Mishta, the celebration of the Chasana, or as it's known, the days of the Sheva Brachas. So that pushes off the Avelos. V'achakach noyeg Shivas Yimei Avelos. And then only following that comes the 7 days of Avelos. Once the days of the Simcha, of the Chasana, of the Shivas Yimei Mishta takes effect, so then the Shivas Yimei Avelos, as you see here, are pushed off. V'chol loisana yomim, and all of these days. In other words, from right after the Chasana, all the days of the Shivas Yimei Mishta, and then of course the days of Avelos. Hu yashan beino anoshim. The husband sleeps together with the men, amongst the men. V'hi yishena bein anoshim, and the wife sleeps amongst the women. They have to be separated from one another. And that includes even the 7 days, even the Shivas Yimei Mishta, as Rashi brings there. The Gemara will say soon that when it comes to Adav Shabbat something that's in private, the Avelos does take effect even during the Shivas Yimei Mishta. However, regarding the kala, we don't hold the kala back from adorning herself. Kol shloishim yayim, for 30 days, as Rashi brings here from the Gemara in Yuma, that for the kala we don't want her to be looking ugly in the eyes of her husband, so we allow her to adorn herself. Now the Gemara explains, the Braisa over here said, what happened? The father of the chasam passed away, or the mother of the kala passes away. So the Gemara explains, v'dafke aviv shel chasen na'imah shel kala. The Braisa specifically said it's the father of the chasen or the mother of the kala that passed away. Because now they don't have anyone that's going to prepare things for them. Because generally it's the father of the kala that's preparing the meal for the chasana, and it's the mother of the kala that's helping the kala prepare herself, to adorn herself, to beautify herself for the chasana. But if what happened was the reverse, that it's the father of the kala that passed away, and the mother is still there to help the kala prepare herself, or it's the mother of the chasana that passed away, so the father of the chasana is still here to help prepare for a new meal for the chasana, so then in such a case, we will not allow them to make the chasana first. Rav from Bar Papa said about this, Rav Chisda, in the name of Rav Chisda. So the point we said before is that the reason why we allow them to make the chasana first and delay the levaya is because you have here all the food that's prepared. So there's really 2 points here. First of all, the father that prepared all of this he's not here anymore, he passed away, so who's going to prepare the food? But there's another point there as well, as we'll see here right away from the continuation of the Gemara. There's a tremendous financial loss that all this food that was prepared will not be used, and we all get spoiled. and therefore we allow them to make the chasna first and use this. But when is this? When do I say that the food that was prepared will all be lost and spoiled and nobody will use it? So this is only true if the meat that was prepared, meaning to what extent was it prepared, that it was already put into a pot with water, and then in this case you can't sell it to anyone. There's nothing you can do with it, it'll get spoiled. But if you did not yet put any water on this meat, misdaven, you're able to sell it, and therefore, even though on one hand it'll be difficult to prepare the chasna all over again, but at least the financial loss you won't have, you have the money and you could prepare again the chasna. So Rava said, but if it's in a large city and there are so many people, so many customers available, even if the water was placed on the meat, it began being prepared, misdaven. Even then you can find people that will buy this meat. So you don't push off the levaya, the chasna has to wait with the levaya first. Rav Papa said, if it's in a small village and there are very few customers, so even this meat that was prepared and it was not yet placed in a pot with water, loy misdaven. But there's so few people, you're not going to find somebody to buy this meat, and therefore you have to make the chasna right away and delay the levaya. Now the question is, now that Rav and Rav Papa said that in a large city there are many customers, so then even if the meat was placed into a pot, you can still find a customer. In a village, Rav Papa said, when there are so few people, so even the meat itself, fresh meat before it's placed into a pot, you also can't find customers. So in which case did Rav Chisda say that only when you place the meat into water, then I say that you can't sell it anymore. So the Gemara explains, the case is in a place, in a city that's about in between, like the city of Masa Machasya. The Mafke Mikrach, it's out of the category of a large city, but a Mafke Mikfar, but it's also not in the category of a small village. So in such a place, a city, a smaller city, here the shiur is, if the meat was already placed in a pot with water, it can't be sold again, and you have to make the chasna right away. Tanya Kavasei Rav Chisda, we learned like this, halacha that Rav Chisda said. And the Braisa begins from the beginning, like we quoted before, another Braisa that says this story. Harei shoye pitei of afuya, the bread or the challah was baked, v'tifchay tavuach, and the meat was slaughtered, v'yene mazik, and the wine prepared, v'nasan mayim lagabi basar, and the water was already placed on the meat, like Rav Chisda said. And now, when meis aviv shel chasna imur shel kala, the father of the chasna or the mother of the kala pass away, Machnisna es hameis l'cheder, we place the dead body in a room and we wait with the levaya, and v'sachosn v'sakala l'chuppah, and the chasna and kala get married, u'bayil bilis mitzvah, and he has the first bi'ila, the first relation with her, which is a mitzvah, u'payrish, then he separates from her, and then they make the levaya, as we saw before, and then v'noyik shivisimei mishta, then first comes the 7 days of celebration of the chasana. Once the chasana happened, so then first is the celebration of the shivisimei mishta. V'achar kach noyik shivisimei avelos. Following those 7 days are the 7 days of avelos. Here the Braisa adds more details. V'chol oisan hayomim, well actually this we had before already, but the Braisa will add more. V'chol oisan hayomim, all of these days, whether the Avelos or the time even before the time of the Mea Mishta, Hu Yashem Ben Anoshim, the husband sleeps amongst the men, V'ishta Yishena Ben Anoshim, and the wife sleeps amongst the women. They're separated from one another. Then the Braisa adds, V'chein Nishapirsa Ishtei Nida. Similar is also the halacha regarding a man that his wife became a Nida. He can't be with her. So here as well, Hu Yashem Ben Anoshim. The husband has to sleep amongst men, v'hi yishena bein ha'anoshim, and the wife sleeps amongst the women. They have to be kept separate from each other. However, regarding the kala, we don't hold back the kala from adorning herself for 30 days. Benkach or benkach, either way, whether al-einus occurred, whether al-einus does not occur, lo yivoil, lo b'erev Shabbos, one should not have the first be'ilah, the be'ilah of the mitzvah, the first time with his wife, not Friday night, night of Shabbos, and also not in Matzah Shabbos, which the Gemara will discuss at length soon at the next plot. So the Gemara now returns to this Braisa here and explains some of the details that it said in the Braisa. So the master said here in this Braisa, Hu Yashem bein anoshim, v'hi yishena bein anoshim. that in the time of the Shivas Yimei Mishta, not only the Shivas Yimei Avelos, but even in the Shivas Yimei Mishta, the man and the wife and the woman, the husband and wife, are separated from one another. So this proves a point that Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan said, even though it was said that there is no mourning, there is no halachas of Avelos during a yantif, when it comes to things of mourning, the halachas of mourning that are in private, Nayig, those halachas of Avelis we do keep. So over here as well, as Rashi says in the Shivas Yimei Mishta, this is a Maya, this is a Yomtiv for the Chassan and the Kala. And nevertheless, when it comes to them being together, we separate them and they have to keep the halachas of Avelis in privacy. Rav Yosef said, Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, said in the name of his father Rava, Loi shanu. When does it say here that you have to separate the husband and the wife, that they each sleep separately? Ela shalei baal. If he still never had any relation with her. Aval baal. But if he was baal, then ishta yisheni imai. Then his wife could sleep with him in the same room, separated from everybody else. Frakte Gemara. How could we make this distinction? So first, as Rashi here explains, the reason for this difference is because of the strength of the Yetzer Hara here. If he was never boiler, we're afraid that we can't trust him, and therefore he has to sleep separately. But in a case where he was already boil once, so therefore, in such a case, the Yetzer Hara is not as strong, and they could sleep together in the same room. But for hahacha, what does it say here in the Braise? The Braise clearly said that the halacha is that when the father or mother passed away, so you make the chasna right away, and he's boil be'ilas mitzvah u'payrish, so he was already boil. V'katani, and nevertheless the Braise says hu yoshem bein anoshim v'hi yishena bein anoshim, that when it comes to the halacha of avelos, that we still separate them even when he was boiler. So what does this mean over here? So we see that there's no distinction if he was boil or not boil. Answers the Gemara, Ki Ka'amar, when did Rava make this distinction whether he was boil already or not? Apirsa Ishtoi Nida. This is when it comes to the case where his wife became a Nida. When his wife became a Nida, so because a Nida is something which is so stringent in a person's eyes, the Isser of being with a wife, a Nida, is more stringent in people's eyes, so therefore we don't have to have such a strong precaution for this in a case where he was not boil her yet. So this is actually what's called today a chuppah nida. He marries his wife and she was a nida right from the beginning, so then we have to separate them from one another. But if he was boiler already once and then afterwards she becomes a nida, we don't have to separate them from one another because a nida is something which is very severe in people's eyes. Whereas when it comes to avelos, which is not so stringent in people's eyes, over here, Chachamim were guys are even stronger to separate the husband from the wife, whether he was boiler already once and even if he was not. Or rather, even if he was, that is, they still separate them from one another. Frek the Gemara, that is. Frek the Gemara, but how can we make this distinction between a nida and the halacha of avelos? But it says in the Braise, v'chein, meaning that the halacha that applies by avelos, that we separate husband from wife, even in a case where he was boil her. And then it says v'chein, that the same halacha applies in a case where his wife is a nida, seemingly, even if he was boiler, we still separate them from one another. So how does Rava make this distinction regarding nida? Answers the Gemara, hachi ka'amar. The v'chein in the Braise does not mean that the halacha of a nida is exactly the same as by the case of avelos. That v'chein, misha pirsa ishte nida. So too, a person that his wife became a nida, but v'loy baal. Here though, it's not the same. Here it's only in the case where he wasn't yet boil. So, but it's the same, like we said before, that hu yashan bein ha'anoshim v'ishta yishena bein anoshim. That the husband sleeps separately and the wife sleeps separately. So the v'chein is only regarding the fact that we separate them from one another. But when we separate them, it's not the same. When it comes to avelos, we separate them even if the husband was already boil, because avelos is something which is lighter in people's eyes. The isser of being with your wife in the time of avelos is lighter in people's eyes. So therefore, chachamim were geyser stronger here and separate them under all circumstances. Nida, which is a more severe isser in people's eyes, chachamim are geyser to separate them only in a case where he was not boil yet at all. Frag the Gemara lemeimre, shall we say, based on what we just learned here, the avelos kilo lei minida. That avelos, the isser of being with one's wife at the time of avelos, is lighter in people's eyes more than the isser of nida. And that's why regarding avelos, chachamim were geyser more, we have to have more of a precaution that he shouldn't come to be with his wife. But we see in another case that it says the opposite. V'amar Rav Yitzchak bar Chanina, Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna said, Kol melachos she'isha oisa lebayla. All the work, all the things that a wife does for the husband. Nida oisa lebayla. A nida could also do for her husband. Chotz mimizigas hakais, besides pouring for him, handing him a glass of wine. Vatzoa samita, spreading the sheets and the bed. Taisus says it's only regarding spreading the sheet and not regarding pillows and blankets. There's a discussion on this in Rishonim, exactly what Atzoa Samita means. Varchotzas panav yadav v'raglov, and also pouring in water to wash his hands, his face, his hands, and his feet. So those are things that we do not allow a nida to do for the husband, not to bring them too close together. So this is the halacha. We see here all of these precautions regarding a nida. When it comes to the halacha of avelos, chachamim will not geyser as harshly. Tanya, there it says, in a case where a person is a nida. Well, again, sorry, and here we're talking about avelos. So in a case where a person's wife is an avela, so over here the person is not allowed to force his wife and tell her that she should adorn herself the way she usually does. Kecheles is eye makeup, pekeses is makeup, blush. So that's, Taisus here has a little bit of a different shot what it is. But that's what Rashi says. So he's not allowed to demand of his wife to put on the makeup the way she usually does. And be'emes amru. In fact, it was said, and be'emes means that this is a halacha that everybody agrees with, maizeges lo yakais. She is allowed to pour for him a kais of wine, even though they're not allowed to be together. But nevertheless, there will not geyser, there's no precaution in this area. She's allowed to pour for him the kais of wine. Umatzas lo yamita, and she's also allowed to spread the bed for him. Umachatzas lo panav yadav v'raglam, she could pour in water to wash his hands, his face, his hands, and his feet. So here we see the exact reverse from before. Over here, when it comes to avelos, there are less gzeira of chachamim, less precaution than there is regarding nida. By nida, we're more stringent about this. And before we said the exact opposite. When it comes to nida, because it's stringent in people's eyes, we're not so precautious about it. If he was bayil her once, they can sleep together in the same room. And by avelos, even if he was bayil her once, there's more precaution, there's more gzeira, and we always separate them from each other. Answers the Gemara, loy kashe. This is not a contradiction. Really, like we said before, avelos is much lighter of an isser in people's eyes to be with one's wife in the time of avelos. But there's a difference here between this braise, or this halacha here that Rav Huna said that is, and the braise that we taught before, or really the halacha that Rav said before, explaining the braise before. And the difference is as follows. Kan ba'avelos didei. Over here, what we're speaking about is that the husband is the one that's an avel. And if he's the one that's an avel, so we are afraid that his avelos will be lighter in his eyes. And therefore, Rav said before, the Braisa said before, that when it comes to avelos, there's no distinction whether he was boiler or not. We don't allow them to sleep together, and each one has to sleep, the husband with noshim, and the woman, the wife, with noshim. That's when he is the avel. Right, as opposed to a nida is more stringent in a person's eyes, and they were not as machmer, as Rav explained before. But kan ba'avelos dida, in this braise, what it's speaking about is that she's the one that's the avel. As we saw in the beginning of the braise, it was speaking about the case that she's the avel, and the braise began saying that when she's an avel, the husband can't demand of her to adorn herself in her time of avelos. So in a time when she's an avel, over here, we're much more lenient regarding avelos, because even if the husband will have a yetzer hara to be with her in this time, but she, which is mourning, will not be interested, and therefore we're not concerned that she'll come to have a relationship with him. And therefore over here, the Braisa says, regarding pouring the wine and preparing the bed and so on, we're much more lenient about this. That's the distinction. Frag the Gemara, how can we say that the Braisa earlier is talking about only his avelos? And that's why over there we're more stringent, we're guys are stronger on him. There the Braisa says that the case was either the father of the chassan passed away and he's an avel, or the mother of the kala passed away and she's the avela, not him. And regarding both of them, it seemingly says the same stringency, the same halacha that we separate husband and wife, even in a case that he was bailer. So this stringency of avelos applies even in the case where she's the one that's an avel. Answers the Gemara, ki katani ashara. This detail here that it says that we're talking whether he's the oval or she's an oval, that is referring to the other details of the halachas that it said there in the Braisa, where the Braisa said that you make the chasana first, and he's boiler first. All those halachas that you push off the levaya, that applies whether he's the oval or whether she became the oval. But this detail regarding the fact that we separate husband from wife even after he was boiler, a special stringency that we find in Avelis even more than a nida, that's only in a case where he's an oval, and not in the case where she is an oval. So that answer still stands. Frag the Gemara, but the Gemara now has a question from a different Braisa. Umi shani ben avelis didei la avelis dida. Can we make this distinction between when he's an oval or when she's an oval? That when he's an oval they have to be separated, and when she's an oval they don't. But for Hatanya we learned in a Braisa where it says as follows: Mi shemeis chama v'chamoisa. A man's father-in-law or mother-in-law passed away. In other words, his wife is an avelis now. He can't force his wife, he can't demand of his wife to use makeup as she usually does. Rather, he should turn over his bed, and he should keep the avelis with her. Since his wife is an avelis, he should keep avelis with her. And the same in the reverse. If her father-in-law or mother-in-law pass away, so the husband is an avelis, she's not allowed to use the regular makeup that she does. She turns her bed over, and she keeps the avelis together with him. So what do we see over here? The Braisa seems to be equating when he's a oval or she's a oval, and it says the same halacha of avelis, and it doesn't make any distinction that when it comes to the husband being an oval, so here we separate husband from wife and they have to sleep separately. Doesn't mention this in this Braisa here. And before we said that when he's a oval, there's a special stringency that because it's something which is lighter in people's eyes, we separate them from one another. Says the Gemara, Tani, you have to learn here, you have to add to this Braisa that Ba'avelus Didei, that when it comes to him being an oval, that Hu Yashan Beina Anashim, V'ishta Yashena Beina Anashim, that the man sleeps separately amongst men and the wife sleeps separately amongst women. We have to add that to what it says regarding the man being an oval. Frek the Gemara, but ha v'chein katani. The Braisa here, it first speaks about the case where the wife is an oval, and then it says v'chein, and so too the same halacha applies when the man, his father passes away, and he's the one that's the oval. It says the same halacha, so it's equating the two. And says the Gemara, ki katani akichulu pirkos. The fact that we're equating the two is just regarding this detail that the wife is not allowed to adorn herself, or he shouldn't demand of her to adorn herself. Regarding this, that she shouldn't put on the makeup, for that they're the same. But the halacha of separating them, so here we could still say the distinction that we said before. When he's the oval, they will have to sleep separately. When she's the oval and she's in mourning, so we're not concerned about them having a relationship with one another, and we do not have to separate them. Frag the Gemara, but there's another thing it said in the Braisa here. V'ha imay katani. It says in the Braisa that v'noyig ima or imay avelos. So imay means that he's together with her. So right now the Gemara understands, what does this mean? My love, don't you think it means as follows? Imay b'mita, that even in the time of avelos, even in the time of his avelos, when his father or mother passed away, she can be with him in the room and even in the same bed with him. So we see over here that what we said before is not true. Even when he's the oval, she could be with him together. And says the Gemara, loy imay bebayis. Here it means, the word imay here means something completely different, that is. Imay in the same house. And it actually means to say that she behaves together with him, meaning in his presence, she should keep the halachas of avelos. That's what it meant to say. As Rav said to Chia, his son, when his wife was an avelos, ba'apa, in her presence, nahoig avelusa. So you should keep the halachas of avelos. The loy ba'apa, but when you're not in her presence, loy tinig avelusa. You should not keep the halachas of avelos. That's what the Braisa here meant when it said imay. Ravashi has a different answer. And this is going back to the original question we had when there was a contradiction here regarding avelos versus nida. In which case are we more concerned? Do we place more precaution? Is there more a gezerah of Chazal to separate husband from wife? So first we had the case of a chassan, and it seems like over there by the chassan that there's a stronger gezerah. Even if he was boiler, still we separate husband from wife. And by nida we don't in such a case. And then afterwards, regarding the malachas that a wife does for the husband, it seemed to be the opposite. By a nida, we're more machmer, and by the avelos, we're more lenient. So that was the original contradiction. So Rav Ashi gives a different answer to this. Rav Ashi says, Mi komedamis avilusa dahacha lavelusa dalma. How could you compare the avelos that we're speaking about here to the avelos that we're speaking about regarding the usual halacha of avelos between husband and wife? And the difference is, what are we speaking about over here? Here we're speaking about the avelos in a case of a chassan and a kala. Then there's the avelos that we're speaking about that in a regular case, a husband and a wife, not a chassan and a kala. And the Gemara explains, avelos the alme chomer. Regarding avelos generally, this is something that is stringent enough in people's eyes. V'loi asil zuli bei. People will not come to be makel or lenient about this, and therefore they weren't geyser as much, and they were actually even geyser less than the case of a nida, as we saw in the halacha that Rav Huna said. But avelos tahacha, why here do we say that the avelos is more stringent? They were geyser even more than a nida. That's because kivin da akilu be'rabanan, since by the avelos of a chassan and a kala, we see that chachamim allowed certain leniencies, so therefore azil is zuli bey. Because there are certain leniencies that they are allowed, we're afraid that the husband might take this too far, and he's going to be with his wife, and therefore they have to sleep separately, even in a case that he was boil her already. So by a chassan and kala, it's a different story. So the Gemara now inquires, my kula, which kula are you referring to that we see, that we find by the chassan and kala, and therefore chachamim were geyser more here, that he shouldn't come to be makel and be lenient when he's not allowed. If you'll say diktani boil bilis mitzvah pirish, that it's the fact that we allow him to be boiled bilis mitzvah, even though a father or a mother passed away, but he's allowed to be boiled the bilis mitzvah, and that's the special leniency that we have here. Hasam, but that's not a leniency in the time of avelos. Rather, hasam mishum delichal all of avelos. Before the levaya and before the burial, or as Gemara he'll say exactly when avelos begins, but the point is, before the levaya there is no avelos yet. And that's why you make the chasana first, and he's allowed to be boiled bilis mitzvah. There's no halacha of avelos that took effect yet. Actually, at this point, the person's called an einon, but there's no avelos yet. And the Gemara explains when avelos begins. Ila Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, Achayetze mi Pesach Habayis. When the body is carried out from the house, that's when avelos begins. Ila Rabbi Shua, or according to Rabbi Shua's opinion, Achayistam Agoylal, until the coffin is covered, and in other words, until after the burial, that's when avelos begins. So therefore, that's not a leniency that you have here regarding avelos. Ella, rather, the pshat of here is, where do we see that there's a unique kula regarding a chassan and a kala, and therefore we're afraid that the chassan and kala may come to be makel even more, the ktani noyek shivas yimei mishta, because not only do they make the chasana, but also they continue the shivas yimei mishta, the 7 days of Sheva Brachas. And v'achakach noyek shivas yimei avelos, and only afterwards, we delay, only afterwards is the days of avelos. So therefore, by a chassan and kala it's different, because there's an extra leniency, we will geyser to separate the chassan from the kala from each other. But regarding regular avelos, that's something which is chomer, which is stringent in people's eyes, and the chachamim were actually more makel there than in the case of a nida. Okay, the Gemara will not continue to the next part of the Braisa. We'll see Mitzvah Shem, the Hemshech of the Gemara.